If a person does not have an emergency fund, then there are two options. One, he or she has to stop investing and direct that money towards that unexpected expense, and the investing can stop for 1, 2, 3 months or so. Or worse, if the expense is a lot more than that, then he or she would have to redeem from their fixed deposits or mutual funds or whatever they have invested in, and that would reduce their net worth. That would reduce their wealth. So the biggest danger to building wealth is not market risk. It is these kind of interruptions to the growth of that wealth by repeated redemptions.
Mind is blown. What a concept. Welcome back. A new week, a new chance to get rich with PATTU. We've got some great responses from our first episode, but more importantly, PATTU, how are you feeling? And how has the last week been since our first recording?
I'm doing fine, and I'm eager to take on the next question.
Yes, we do have a very interesting question on this episode, PATTU, and also from a 20-odd-year-old person. We'll play the question in a bit, but I wanted to start with a googly question. And everyone knows what a googly is, right? It's a ball that turns the other way when you least expect it. So this question is a follow-up from last week's episode. Remember, it was somebody who hadn't started earning and wanted to know whether they should start thinking about investing. And PATTU, you said yes, perhaps think of a recurring deposit, which made a lot of sense. And you also said perhaps consider index funds, which could be like the Nifty 50, etc., etc. And since the past episode, I realized and noticed that stocks like Adani are also part of the Nifty, which, and I don't mean to sound anti-national at all, I have nothing against the company, but they are volatile. And there are some serious questions that still need to be answered by the company. So what do you feel about that? Are index funds as safe as we thought last week?
Market risks are never going to go away. I mean, there's always going to be some stock under some kind of trouble. And I think an index investor should not worry about what stocks are there inside the basket. That's the whole point of being an index investor. You just track the index and you don't worry about what's inside your portfolio. So there'll always be some kind of stock that's in hot water, but it just keeps moving. They move in and out of the index. And if you look at the stock market volatility, it's a constant. It doesn't matter whether we are in a bull run or a bear run, the market is always going to be volatile, and we will always find some reason for why it's volatile, but we never know. It's just some mixture of market demand versus supply. So I would suggest ignore that and invest systematically.
But that leads to a question, and I'm full of questions. Who decides which stocks go into the Nifty and what weightage each stock is given? I mean, is it a group of people? Is it automated? How does this work?
It is done by the index curator. Either it is the Sensex. The Sensex is done by the PSE, or the Nifty is done by the NSE. It is done by a group of people, and they meet twice a year to decide. For some indices, it's twice a year. For some indices, it's more often than that. And they decide what stocks get to go inside. And so it's a set of man-made rules. And most importantly, these rules are subject to change. And they can change after we start investing. And that has happened several times in the past.
So literally, my imagination is going wild. There's a boardroom. They meet twice a year. They have this meeting and say this particular stock should go for this particular reason. Is there a vote? Who are these people? And does the public, select these people? Is it a democracy at all?
No. The rules are defined, and after that, it's pretty much algorithmic. The changes are done twice a year or more often than that, depending on the index. But what I meant to say is that the board would meet from time to time and consider any changes to the algorithm rules if necessary. And that has happened several times in the past couple of decades.
All right. That was the googly. Enough of a segue. It's time for the real business, which is your questions. Listeners, we can't do this show without you. Make sure you send in your questions. You can do it as a voice note. You can do it as a text message. You can do it any way you feel comfortable. You can be anonymous. You can name yourself, whatever it is. Try and contact PATTU on his Facebook page or on YouTube. Try and contact Offspin Media Friends on our Insta page. Direct message, whichever way you can reach us. We'd be happy to hear from you. This show is entirely about your questions. Coming to this episode's question, another 20-year-old. It's pretty clear who our mass listenership is and what age group they are at, right? Let's play this question and then discuss it.
I'm 27 years old and I earn 30,000 rupees a month. How much money should I keep in my emergency fund?
So that leads me to a simple question, right? We are growing our money. It's all growing into this one big corpus. Why is there a need for a secondary corpus for emergency funds? And what is an emergency fund? Sorry, I asked too many questions. Over to you, Pattu.
So we know that life is full of unexpected surprises, right? I mean, our mobile phone is now working nice and well, and then we just accidentally drop it on the floor and it smashes, and then we need to fix its screen, or we may have to buy a new mobile. We park our vehicle on the road. Somebody comes and bumps onto it, and then that entails repairs and so on. So an emergency fund is basically it's a rainy day stash, so that we can dip into it and handle expenses that are unexpected. Of course, small expenses, reasonably manageable expenses that are unexpected. The reason why this is extremely crucial for young earners is that they would have just started investing, and they would have they have not much to play with, and they would put some money in, let's say, in an index fund like you recommended last time, some amount in a recurring deposit, etc. But what if they suddenly have to change their mobile phones, or their laptop crashed, and they need to buy a new laptop, or service the laptop, change the hard drive, retrieve data from the hard drive? All these are unexpected surprises, and they're pretty expensive. So um, if a person does not have an emergency fund, then there are two options. One, uh, he or she has to stop investing and direct that money towards that unexpected expense, and the investing can stop for 1 to 3 months or so. Or worse, if the expense is a lot more than that, then he or she would have to redeem from their fixed deposits or mutual funds or whatever they have invested in, and that would reduce their net worth. That would reduce their wealth. So the biggest danger to building wealth is not market risk. It is these kind of interruptions to the growth of that wealth by repeated redemptions.
Mind is blown. What a concept. Let me repeat that. The biggest risk to growing wealth is not market volatility, but when you keep interrupting that process of growing your wealth. This is perhaps the biggest personal mistake I've made. In my mind, for some reason, instinctively, I've always thought, let's grow this one corpus, this large, and everything comes from that. And please don't make that mistake. Right, Pattu?
Absolutely. So it's the emergency fund is, you can think of it as another form of insurance, just like you have life insurance, you have health insurance. So it's an insurance for your young corpus as it's growing. So it's basically like planting a tree. When you plant a tree, initially it needs some support. The stem needs some support to move up in the right direction. Otherwise, most trees would die. So you build a guard around it, and once the tree becomes strong, you can remove the guard, and the tree itself would become so strong it would break the guard. So that's essentially how we have to structure an emergency fund. It's basically to protect those unnecessary redemptions. Of course, life can be harsh, and we may get an expense which is beyond what we have in our emergency fund. But we can't handle every kind of risks out there, so we can only do what we can. But what I would recommend is try to put away at least 5% to 10% of your take-home pay into an emergency fund every month and start building it.
5 to 10% of whatever you earn into an emergency fund. What is the percentage of an emergency fund versus the actual, what should we call it, the main fund or the retirement corpus? Do you have a ratio of what they look like in comparison to each other?
The emergency fund would be small, but let's think in terms of investments per se and contributions to each corpus. So I would recommend for retirement that we invest an amount that is about 70 to 100% of our monthly expenses.
Nice. Okay.
So if our monthly expenses is X, then we must try to invest at least 70 to 100% of that X for retirement alone. For emergencies, we can just we can just try to manage with whatever we can scrape around here and there. 5% is okay, 10% is great.
Amazing. So on this show, we have vowed that we won't keep it vague, right? Let's get into the dirty details. The question we've received today is 30,000 rupees per month, which means ideally this person should restrict spending to 15,000 rupees a month and invest 15,000 as a retirement corpus, or close to 15,000 as a retirement corpus, maybe 10 to 12,000, and then what, 3,000 rupees for the retirement fund? Have I got that right?
These are just thumb rules, and we can't ask every young earner to try and adopt this, because they can't, because they won't have much space to play with, especially when their income is small. But what I would recommend is, first, don't even start thinking about investing for retirement initially. Try to build an emergency corpus. We'll talk about where to build it. Try to build a corpus that's that's worth about at least anywhere between 3 months, 6 months, 9 months of your expenses, monthly expenses. So if your monthly expenses are 20,000, you can build an emergency fund that is 3 times that or 6 times that, something. And then you contribute. First, you aggressively build the emergency fund, and then you can reduce the contributions to the emergency fund to, let's say, 5% or 10%. And then you can focus on investing for retirement and other goals.
Wow. So for early earners, you're saying the first priority should be the emergency fund.
Correct.
That's amazing. I don't think anyone's ever said that so clearly.
That's the kind of moat you build around your wealth, so that it safeguards those unnecessary redemptions or interruptions in investing.
By the way, on this show, no amount of money is small or big. And it's amazing that, this show can do something for everyone, no matter what their earning levels are. All right, so first focus on your emergency fund. Once it is around 6 times, maybe 9 times your monthly earnings or your monthly expenses, that's when you start thinking about a retirement larger corpus. Now we delve into that part of the episode of how we do it. But what would be the first few steps you start thinking about? FDs, mutual funds, where does one start investing an emergency fund? Obviously, it needs to be liquid, right?
So what are the requirements for an emergency fund? One is you need to get your hands on that money as quickly as possible. That is all. I mean, that is the only requirement of an emergency fund. You don't need to worry about what is the return you're going to get, because life is always going to give you some emergency or the other. That emergency fund is not going to compound or grow into something big, because that is the one which is designed for interruptions, and that's always going to happen. So let's not spend too much time on which is going to give us more returns for an emergency fund. That's a complete waste of our time. So all we need is for it to be liquid. So the basic thing I would recommend is have a bank account which is different from your salary account. So your salary account is where the money from your employer or your business is there, and that's where you're going to take from for all your day-to-day expenses. So you can't put your emergency fund there, because then it's all going to be one mess, and you're going to remove from the emergency fund unknowingly before you know it. So put it in a separate account. SB account is fine, because it's going to be just as liquid as your salary account, and you can have an ATM card for it. You can have a online account for it, so you can withdraw from it or transact with it in any different number of ways. So that would be the first step. And also, an ideal emergency fund can have different layers. It can also be as diversified as an investment portfolio. You can have
Interesting.
Some money in an SB account, some money in a fixed deposit, some money in a liquid fund, and so on. So, I mean, it depends on how interested you are in knowing about all these avenues and your knowledge of personal finance. But for the absolute beginner, I would say don't bother about all that. Just get yourself a bank account. I'm sure all of us always have an additional bank account which is not our salary account, and just divert this money there and let it be there. Let it just rot there. If you
and throw away its debit card.
Yeah, until you get an emergency. So that's the way to do it.
In your experience and speaking to so many people you've helped, in the past few years or decades, how long does it take to build an emergency fund of 6 times your monthly expenses? It can't literally be 6 months, right? It's slower than that.
It can vary a lot. It depends on. See, most people have already started investing before they build their emergency fund, so which means that
Exactly.
they can't build that aggressively as we want to. And also during the time we build an emergency fund, we could have emergencies.
Absolutely. So, you literally put aside 5,000 the first month, the second month, and the third month you have to withdraw all 10,000.
It's all gone. So yeah, so it's a matter of luck. But what matters is our discipline. Forget about the uncertainties. But as long as we are disciplined in putting away whatever we can,
Control what you can.
eventually we should be able to get something comfortable.
Awesome. I'm going to delve into some other questions. So we've already answered that it should be a simple savings bank account for beginners. It could then get diversified into mutual funds or a combination of assets. Are there certain emergencies that we should not touch our emergency fund for and instead have had insurance for? Or does that come later after we've set up our emergency fund? For example, you have an accident, you should definitely have medical insurance.
Absolutely. So that is so whatever you can get yourself insured. Insurable risks are different. We are now these emergency funds are typically small expenses which you haven't thought about, but it just hits you, and you don't want to get stuck into a cash flow problem because of that. So the emergency fund is going to help it. But even if you have health insurance from your employer, or you have your private health insurance policy, there are certain costs called non-medical expenses, like for example gloves or sanitary use in a patient's room, and cosmetic medicines, whatever it is. Those will not be covered by a health insurance policy, and typically those expenses would amount to anywhere between 10% to 15% of the hospital bill. So the insurer will only pay for the medical expenses. The non-medical expenses we still have to pay. So even if we have a health insurance, the emergency fund is going to be useful.
Right.
So it's like I said, it's one. The emergency fund is only one form of insurance, but there are other forms of insurance which we need to strengthen our castle of wealth.
Which we should dedicate an entire episode or 2 or 3 to, because it's such a vast topic. And also on that medical insurance bit, it's only if you spend a night in hospital that you can claim, right? If it's like a day procedure, you can't even claim insurance. Is the little I know.
Oh no, that's wrong. Actually, to this day, many hospitals and many doctors believe that. That is wrong, because we now have more than 1,000 daycare procedures, and as technology is advancing, whatever took a week in hospital, surgery plus recovery can be done in a matter of hours. And the insurer would like that, because they're going to spend less, right? So for them, it's not going to cut into their profit margin. So the insurer is going to be happy to cover a daycare procedure as long as it's an approved daycare procedure in their terms.
Amazing. What an unexpected googly for me this time. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'm going to delve into my medical insurance right now and break this news to my entire family that, look, even daycare procedures are covered. Pattu, would you recommend if we move it to a separate savings bank account, the emergency fund, we should activate the recurring deposit on that as well?
No. I would say first let the money build in the second savings bank account. And then once you're comfortable that you have enough for reasonable sized emergencies, you can continue. Like I said, that 10%, 5% from your take home pay, you can probably start a recurring deposit with it, or you can accumulate some money in the savings bank account and put it into a fixed deposit. Then you have something called a flexi deposits, where beyond a certain threshold, that amount goes into a fixed deposit, and it's still as liquid as a savings bank account. There are multiple options. My view is that there are certain things in personal finance that we should not spend too much time worrying about, and the emergency fund is one of them. You know that it's got to be liquid. You put it in somewhere liquid. You know that it's not going to grow. There's going to be some emergency that's going to deplete it. So let's not waste too much time on what are the two different options are.
And that's my cue. Pattu very subtly telling me to end this episode. It's been wonderful chatting about emergency funds, Pattu. Thank you so much. To summarize very quickly in a few seconds, it should ideally be 5 to 10% of your monthly earnings. You should ideally try to build it to around 6 to 9 times of your monthly expenses. And only once it's in place, start thinking about a retirement corpus or your grand life corpus, as we like to call it here. Thanks a lot. Keep those questions coming in. And that's it for the emergency fund. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Alright, it's time to simplify the financial terms Pattu and Sid used on this episode of Let's Get Rich with Pattu. Buckle up, let's get financially literate. The first one, emergency funds. It's a stash of money set aside to cover the financial surprises life throws your way. It could be an unexpected medical bill, car repair, or even losing your job. It's your financial life jacket when things go south. The second term, corpus. It is the total amount of money you have in a particular fund or investment. If you are saving for retirement, for example, the corpus would be the total money you have saved when you finally retire. You can keep adding to this corpus. And the last one, flexi deposit. It is a kind of fixed deposit which can be automatically created when your account reaches a certain threshold of money. It has flexible tenures, which means you can take that money out whenever you want and still earn higher interest than a savings account. That's all for this episode. Let's learn more next week.
You just heard Let's Get Rich with Pattu, an Offspin original. Isn't it the coolest show you've heard in the Indian podcasting space? And even if it isn't, what's the point of getting rich alone, right? Share this show with those you care about and perhaps even with those you don't care about. But make sure you share this show with only those who you don't mind being richer than you. The music on this show was created by Pattu's biggest fan, Rajesh Ravi. And everyone on the Offspin team had some part or the other to play on the show. Let me name them quickly. Harshli Nisrani, Krishank Das, Sandeep Banerjee, Arif Chagla, Anant Krishnan, Rajesh Ravi, and Heer Khan. Heer, by the way, is also to be blamed for giving Pattu his gangster look, which is how he looks on a daily basis. And me, Siddhant, your host. Let's Get Rich is available on all audio platforms wherever you consume your podcasts. So spread the word and we'll see you next week. You know we do this show only to help you guys, right? But if you're listening and you're that one person who has perhaps lost money and holding it against Pattu or me for making you lose that money, then not only are you a mean person, but you also need to listen to this legal disclaimer. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute any financial advice. Views expressed are not official positions of financial institutions or Pattu or mine for that matter. Although we strongly believe in them, listen to this disclaimer even more carefully. We recommend consulting a qualified professional before making decisions. We disclaim liability for inaccuracies or losses from using this information in our show. By listening, you agree that the host, guests, and producers are not only awesome people, but they are not responsible for your financial decisions or outcomes.